national interest, environmental security of Indonesia. Last lesson we went through the issue. What is the issue? Capturing some of these images. It is deforestation. You could call it environmental degradation. You could call it the destruction of forests. Whatever language you want to use, there is something affecting Indonesia's environmental security. And that something is destruction of their forests too quickly, or deforestation, logging, happening too quickly. The issue is global deforestation, largely due to us. We can't really point the finger at Indonesia and go, look, you guys are destroying your forests. Brazil, why do you keep chopping down the Amazon? We're the ones buying the stuff. We're buying bookcases, we're buying beds, we're buying paper, we're buying textbooks. So it's our thirst for wood and paper that is forcing people in developing nations to chop down their forests. So it's a global effort to slow down deforestation. In 2007, the number one logger in the world. A great simple stat that's easy to remember. So here's a problem they have, which is affecting their environmental security, logging and logging too much. There are concerns which are being encouraged by environmental groups. Another one of our non-state actors. So we heard about Human Rights Watch as a non-state actor. You've got others who do work trying to raise awareness about deforestation. Using the internet, using social media really effectively to raise awareness of their concerns with deforestation. And now you have this shift happening, and it's been happening for about a decade now, towards forests as assets. Not necessarily as assets once you chop them down, but assets whilst they're there in terms of ecotourism. Tasmania has had some success doing this, turning their forests into ecotourist sites to attract money through tourism. The developing world is just starting to get organised. So that's the issue. Also very important for all states to be seen as good international citizens. It's not the best when reports put you at the top of the list in terms of deforestation. Especially at a time when we're talking about carbon emissions, we're talking about states trying to reduce their carbon emissions, and deforestation is one of the biggest causes one of the highest increases in carbon emissions. There's an issue, our issue. A little bit more, let me emphasise this a little further. Indonesia's forest cover. You can see a very clear trend there. Each year, year on year, they have less and less forest. They're chopping it down, they're using it to fund their growth. Relative to us, they're quite poor. Income per person is very low compared to us. I think they're at about 9,000 and we're at about 48,000, I think. It's around that. So how are they increasing economic growth? And helping it, selling it to big multinationals, then sell it to people in Western nations. So you've got the decrease in forest cover. This graph captures how bad that decrease really large of their forest. This graph is image is a little less clear, but it uses colour, the colour red, to show areas that have had forest cover losses. It also shows Indonesia is quite a dense archipelago. An archipelago means a nation of many islands. It's a serious issue for them. So serious that we have Mr. Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, the Indonesian president, talking about it in a speech at the 60th.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Blessed with Tropical Cotton Conference.
So he's presenting to an audience of dignitaries. First 60 seconds was just him mumbling. And now he starts talking about their efforts and why the environment is important. He's standing at the forest. You can see behind him, this press conference is being held in front of a forest.
It is indeed an honor and pleasure for me and my government to be part of this important meeting. The theme of this conference, Forest Indonesia, Alternative Futures to Meet the Demand for Food, Fuel, Fiber, and REDD+, is very relevant and timely. For Indonesia, like many other countries blessed with tropical forests, are facing the challenge of sustainably managing its vitally important forest resources. Hence, let me congratulate the organizers, C4 and their partners, for bringing together under one roof forest stakeholders from all over Indonesia and the world. We have among us government officials and representatives of NGOs, civil society, as well as the business and academic communities. We may have different backgrounds, but we all have known the pleasure of resting in the cool shade of a tree. It would be nice if one day we could organize a conference like this in the open air, protected from the heat of the sun by the green crown of sturdy trees. I am glad that this conference discussions and its outcome will be shared online by audiences worldwide, including the forthcoming COP17 in Durban, South Africa. This will be an excellent opportunity for us to stress on the importance to walk the talk and not just talk the talk. On my part, I will continue my work and dedicate the last 3 years of my term as president to deliver enduring results that will sustain and enhance the environment and forests of Indonesia.
Okay. You can watch the full video on the STC Global Politics website. It's there. It's 21 minutes. I don't want to get too caught up into him, but what he's done for Indonesia has been phenomenal in the last 8 years. So his term finishes this year. He can only serve 2 terms in Indonesia, but he could have just cleared the whole forest to make everyone far wealthier, and instead he's gone down the track to sustainable forestry, which is costly because businesses just want to clear the forest. So it's an issue. It's very important to all of them. But what have they done? Indonesia has signed up to the UNREDD program. So the REDD stands for Reducing Emissions, Deforestation and Forest Degradation, so the REDD. So they have taken an action. This is the action they've taken. And it's got 2 parts. One, they've gotten involved with the UNREDD program, and as a part of that, they've worked diplomatically with Australia. So we're helping them bilaterally, the 2 states working together to help Indonesia achieve some of their UNREDD goals, reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. Yes, because no other assessor will know what the UNREDD program is. So you put UN-REDD and then brackets, reducing emissions from deforestation. This is one of those acronyms that people won't know that you need to spell out. WTO, you don't need to spell it. Everyone knows what that means. So what is it? The YouTube video is there. I've got a link to a video on my laptop.
REDD is a new international framework to help stop deforestation. It stands for Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation in Developing Countries. Why do we need REDD? Because destroying tropical forests releases more carbon dioxide than the entire global transport sector. Without a solution to deforestation, there won't be a solution to climate change. Tropical forests also sustain half of all life on Earth and generate vital services for the planet, such as producing rainfall and cooling the land surface. And 1.4 billion of the world's poorest people also depend on these forests for their survival. How will REDD work? As well as reducing their own carbon dioxide emissions, Under RED, industrialized countries will pay developing nations to keep their forests standing. Until now, forests have only had economic value when cut for their wood or cleared for their land. An area of tropical forest the size of a football pitch is destroyed every 4 seconds. Increasingly, this is to satisfy global demand for products like timber, beef, soy, and palm oil. So who gets paid under RED? Countries that produce emissions from deforestation, plus countries that continue to conserve large areas of intact forest, countries that plant new trees, and countries that only use their forests sustainably. When will RED begin? Officially after 2012, if a new international climate treaty includes RED. But we cannot afford to wait, because once lost, these forests will be gone forever. And how much will it cost? That's $1 billion question. To halve deforestation by 2020, financing for RED will need to scale up to an estimated $38 billion a year. But doing nothing is a $1 trillion disaster every year. So how will RED work? It will take more than just money. Many different stakeholders, from local farmers to national governments, will need to cooperate for RED to be effective. RED will only work if the needs and rights of Indigenous people and local communities are respected. If governance is strengthened to ensure that payments don't end up in the wrong hands, and if monitoring systems are put in place to ensure that emissions reductions are real and permanent. So what next? Business as usual is not an option. Forest destruction is accelerating climate change and damaging the Earth's life support system. RED may be the last, best chance to save tropical forests. But to get RED right, we need to get ready for RED now.
So Indonesia has used a foreign policy instrument to achieve its goal. Foreign policy instruments are tools that states use in their relations with other global actors. So any time a state takes an action which involves relations with other states, they will have to use some sort of foreign policy instrument. That instrument might be diplomacy. It might also involve military power. So there are a number of different foreign policy instruments that states can use. In this example, Indonesia has used the foreign policy instrument of diplomacy. So diplomacy refers to discussions and agreements between states as they seek to fulfill their national interest. We know Indonesia in this case has made an agreement with Australia in order to fulfill their national interest of maintaining forests and the environmental security. So this action, working with Australia, this action is an example of using diplomacy as a foreign policy instrument. We have here a brief visual which captures the way we're going to talk about national interests. In a way, this is a summary. So at the start, we've got an issue. The issue in this case is deforestation, the destruction of Indonesia's forests. This relates to Indonesia's national interest, their ambition to maintain environmental security, the future use of their resources, the sustainable use of their resources. So in a way, you can think of this as the challenge or the problem. Now, the state has taken an action, a response. That response has been participating in UNRED and working with Australia in the middle here. And of course, as with everything we do this year, this response is effective in some ways and limited in other ways. Let's look at the effectiveness of this response. Practical results. Indonesia has managed to gain $30 million from Australia to help them deal with the challenge of deforestation. And with that money, they've planted 50,000 seedlings, and there are another 1.3 million seedlings being prepared as a part of that project. So these are some real practical results. We've also got symbolic results. 2 states, Australia and Indonesia, who weren't very close in the 80s and 90s, now working together. You've got a partnership, a dialogue between states. This is, of course, an example of bilateralism. So symbolically, you could say this response has been highly effective. However, we also want to be able to talk about the limitations of this response. And the biggest way in which this response has been limited has been by recent events and Australia being caught spying on Indonesia. Let's watch 2 short videos.
There's no end to the diplomatic row between Australia and Indonesia over spying allegations. Paul Caddick joins us from Parliament House in Canberra. Good morning, Paul. The Indonesians haven't been impressed by the Prime Minister's response.
And the government has been hoping that cool heads would prevail, but this seems to just keep getting more and more heated. Tony Abbott told Parliament yesterday that there would be no explanation and no apology after claims of Australian intelligence spying on the Indonesian president. The Indonesians have called that regrettable, warning Australia not to underestimate the impact this is having. Labor and the Greens are pushing for the so-called Obama approach. The US president got on the phone with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, reassuring her that there would be no more surveillance on her phone, that it would never happen again. Tony Abbott's being urged to take the same approach with the Indonesian president.
The most important thing is that Tony Abbott doesn't allow this to become a running sore.
At the moment, Tony Abbott seems to be risking everything on the bet that Indonesia will not escalate the situation and take further action.
There are rumblings from Indonesia that further action could affect cooperation on everything from people smuggling to terrorism. But there's also been a reminder today that around 10 years ago we learned that Indonesia had been spying on Australian politicians and had bugged the Australian embassy in Jakarta during the East Timor crisis. But there was very little response from Canberra then. It's a different story now, with the Indonesian press fueling the outrage coverage today, saying that Australia has gone too far, that Australia has violated Indonesia's sovereignty, with calls for a harsh response to the kangaroo country. There's been no further comment from the Prime Minister so far today. Tony Abbott this morning has been launching the Wishing Tree Christmas appeal for the Salvation Army. You wonder what he might be wishing for today.
All right, Paul. Thank you. Paul Caddick in Canberra.
So what we see from this video is that as a result of Australia's actions, Australia being caught spying on Indonesia, their ability to cooperate to solve the challenge of deforestation has been hindered. And so Indonesia's response is limited. It's limited because of recent actions and recent relations being disturbed. Here's one more shorter video.
Baik yang berpakaian yang ada di dalam negeri, saudara-saudaraku, sekalian datang kemari.
Langkah persahabatan selama ini dilakukan oleh kedua negara itu bukanlah persahabatan yang sejati, tapi hanya pura-pura munafik. Dan kami melihat Australia ini adalah negara musuh dalam selimut yang harus kita singkirkan dari bumi pertiwi ini. Itu menurut kami.
Australia yang sangat melecehkan kedaulatan NKRI. Yang dituntut, Australia harus segera meminta maaf kepada rakyat Indonesia.
One more thing I'd like you to do in order to clearly establish how this incident between Australia and Indonesia has affected Indonesia's ability to deal with deforestation is to read the article on page 5 and then to answer these 3 questions. Finally, bring this first national interest to a close. Here are 3 broad questions and we'll look at the answers to these in class. In particular, the last one, evaluating Indonesia's response. Let's go back to how we're going to structure this. It's going to need to have 4 parts. What is the issue challenging Indonesia's national interest? What have they done? So their response, how has it been effective, and what are the limitations to its effectiveness?